From the Cronkite studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Good evening, and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Megan Espor. Tonight, we take a look at the top stories from our Washington, D.C. bureau, from Senator Martha McSally's announcement about military sexual assault to the multi-state drought plan.
It was just a month ago that Arizona Senator Martha McSally shocked Washington, announcing she had been raped by a superior officer while in the Air Force.
But McSally says admission has given her a new purpose, one she took to a forum today on campus sexual assault. Cronkite News reporter Alyssa Klink was at the event.
I'm here at the U.S. Naval Academy, where the military careers of the nation's top naval officers begin. But Arizona Senator Martha McSally said something else begins here, and on other college campuses, something more sinister.
Look to your left and look to your right. 1 in 3 women here probably have actually been through this, and 1 in 4 men. That's a little uncomfortable to think about.
Those uncomfortable statistics refer to the number of people who will experience sexual assault in their lifetimes. McSally is one of those statistics. She said during an Armed Services Committee hearing on sexual assault in the military that she was preyed upon and raped while in the Air Force.
So, like you, I am also a military sexual assault survivor.
A recent Defense Department report said there were 117 assaults reported at the nation's 3 military academies in the 2017 to 2018 academic year, 5 more than the year before. While today's discussion was at the Naval Academy, it aims to address a problem on college campuses nationwide.
This isn't easy work. The target populations are constantly changing. However, we firmly believe that it is our responsibility to be vigilant and vocal about listening to our students and protecting them.
This was the first of 2 days of sessions that drew officials from more than 100 campuses across the country, including the University of Arizona and Arizona State. McSally said she never came forward because she didn't trust the system to handle her case. She now insists that the military should be allowed to investigate its own. She made a pointed exception today, however, for students at the military academies.
We put, 20-year-olds in charge of 18-year-olds in a military structure.
McSally said the meeting here is just the first step, and she expects to continue the fight, pointing to a Pentagon announcement of a task force on the issue last month that she said has been very responsive. In Annapolis, Maryland, Alyssa Klink, Cronkite News.
Do you remember what President Donald Trump said yesterday about defense spending and manufacturing jobs? If you don't, you're not alone. The biggest headline from the president's speech at an Ohio tank plant was when he veered into an attack on the late Arizona Senator John McCain. The fallout from that speech is still being felt, as Alyssa Klink reports live from our Washington bureau. Alyssa?
The president's comments yesterday were just the latest in a string of insults that sparked to life again on Saturday, as they so often do with this president, in a series of tweets. It's not surprising that the president has no love for the former Arizona senator. What's surprising people about this latest round is that it comes almost 7 months after McCain's death.
Who would think of attacking someone who's dead, let alone a former senator, let alone a former war hero, let alone someone who ran as the head of the Republican Party a couple of presidential elections ago?
How about the man who ran as the party's nominee in the last election?
I endorsed him at his request, and I gave him the kind of funeral that he wanted, which as president, I had to approve. I don't care about this. I didn't get thank you. That's okay. Not my kind of guy, but some people like him, and I think that's great.
That was Trump yesterday at an Army tank plant in Ohio. His 40-minute speech suddenly veered into a 6-minute jab at McCain. It followed weekend tweets in which Trump blamed McCain for the investigation into Russian meddling in the election. Meghan McCain defended her father on Twitter, then fired back this week on her talk show, The View.
Your life is spent on your weekends, not with your family, not with your friends, but obsessing over great men you could never live up to. That tells you everything you need to know about his pathetic life right now.
Several Republican senators have come forward to defend their former colleague and chastise Trump, whose attacks are hurting him more than they're hurting McCain, says Arizona pollster Mike Noble.
Rhetoric like this is probably not going to help the cause. when it comes to the 2020 general election.
Noble says that's because many Arizonans still respect McCain, which is one reason Talon says Trump needs to let it go.
Listen, if you didn't like him, that's fine, but to go to this level and say the things that he did, it's just, that's a new achievement, unquote, of, you know, a new low of attacking someone who's passed away.
There may be another unintended consequence for the president. Noting that her late husband's legacy of integrity is under attack, Cindy McCain today put out a fundraising appeal for the McCain Institute to carry on the senator's work. In Washington, Alyssa Klink, Cronkite News.
The on-again, off-again ban on transgender troops appears to be back on again. The ban was lifted in 2016 under President Barack Obama, but for the past 2 years, President Donald Trump has been pushing to reinstate it, and his plan took a step forward this week. Cronkite News reporter Love Junius is live in our Washington, D.C. bureau with details and reaction. Love?
Like so much in this administration, news that the president wanted to reinstate that transgender ban first came in a tweet. It was quickly challenged in several different lawsuits, but a federal court this week removed the last roadblock, and Congress has not been able to stop the new ban on transgender military service.
The resolution is adopted.
A resolution condemning the Trump administration ban on transgender individuals in the military, condemning but not stopping. The ban will take effect 2 weeks from today, and that has Captain Jennifer Peace frustrated.
So this is weakening our military and our national security by preventing soldiers from joining the military.
The National Center for Transgender Equality says the U.S. has more than 134,000 transgender veterans and 15,000 active transgender troops. Turning those people away just because of their gender identification is the wrong way to go, says advocates.
This ban affects doctors, pilots, linguists, intelligence experts, people with highly specialized skills that are hard to come by, that the military is fighting tooth and nail to attract into the military to serve their country.
But retired Army General Thomas Fuhr says transgender individuals can still serve with some qualifiers.
Let's say you showed up at a recruiting station and you said, I'm transgender. The way you get turned away is if you say, I am suffering from gender dysphoria, or, you know, some medical person makes that determination. Otherwise, you come in, you say you're transgender, but I'm stable in this identity that I am right now.
Sfor says the new policy makes military sense. He said people with gender dysphoria are more likely to have severe anxiety, for example.
Policy says, you know, you got to be stable, so you can't have gender dysphoria or can't be a source of anxiety to you that you're.
Peace, who served at Fort Huachuca, disagrees. She says the real stress comes from hiding who you are from your command and coworkers. But for now, she's focused on getting transgender soldiers diagnosed before the new ban takes effect April 12th.
We've just been encouraging our members, if they're currently serving, to come out to get a diagnosis so they can be grandfathered in and continue serving. And then for those who are unable to, or those who are in the recruitment process, we've been trying to support them in any way we can.
Yesterday's House vote was largely symbolic and partisan. Just 5 Republicans joined 233 Democrats to approve the resolution. For Arizona lawmakers, it was a straight party line vote, with 5 Democrats for it and 4 Republicans against it. In Washington, Love Junius, Cronkite News.
When state rankings come out, it's not often that Arizona finds itself near the top of the list, but recent improvements in the number of child abuse cases in Arizona have been good enough that state leaders got an award for it from a national group. Micah Bledsoe joins us live from Washington with the story. Micah?
In 2016, Arizona had nearly 19,000 children living in out-of-home care. Today, that number has dropped to about 13,000. That change brought Governor Doug Ducey and First Lady Angela Ducey to Washington today, where they were honored by Child Help, which says Arizona is setting the standard for child safety in the rest of the country. An upbeat Governor Doug Ducey boasted that Arizona has moved from last place in the nation to first in removing kids from out-of-home care.
When I took office in 2015, our Department of Child Safety was being called the most broken agency in the country. I'm very proud that today it's considered a model for improving outcomes and providing kids with safe and loving homes.
First Lady Angela Ducey got a bit emotional in her turn at the podium.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm so emotional.
She says the issue became personal after a family member adopted an abused child out of foster care. That's why it's important to her that kids get the best care possible.
Our goal is to ensure that trauma-informed care becomes the standard for supporting children in not only Arizona, but across the United States.
Both Duceys credit Arizona's turnaround to a collaboration between state agencies and faith-based and community groups. But Child Help founder and CEO Sarah O'Mara says much credit goes to the Duceys, who she called a package deal in the fight against child abuse.
Their welfare child system is something to behold. It's developing a national model of trauma-informed care that will make our children's futures brighter everywhere.
Prevent Child Abuse Arizona Executive Director Rebecca Ruffner agrees the state has seen improvements, but this is no time to relax.
But those efforts need a lot of support from our state legislature, and they need support, continued support from our governor and first lady, so that we can prevent child abuse and neglect before it happens.
Ducey says that while the state has reduced the number of kids in out-of-home care by nearly 25%, there is always room to improve.
There was a backlog. There were kids that were not being cared for. We need more foster families, more adoptive families. We need resources for kinship care.
Angela Ducey told me this morning before the award ceremony that when her husband decided to get involved with politics, she insisted he keep kids in mind, which is why she's so willing to help out, and it's such an honor to have the state's work recognized. In Washington, Micah Bledsoe, Cronkite News.
Earlier this week, the world watched stunned as the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris went up in flames. The cathedral was not destroyed as many had feared, but it suffered extensive damage that could take years to repair.
The blaze was particularly distressing for some people in Washington, where another Gothic cathedral, the Washington National Cathedral, is still recovering from an earthquake in 2011. Cronkite News reporter Alyssa Klink brings us their story.
On a warm, sunny day in Washington, visitors pause to listen as the funerary bell rings at the Washington National Cathedral. The board-on bell rang for 7 minutes, joining cathedrals around the globe to remember the tragic fire Tuesday at Notre Dame in Paris.
It's the most terrifying thing to any of us who love and serve cathedrals, because we're called to be stewards of the place.
When Dean of the National Cathedral, Randy Hollerith, heard about the fire at Notre Dame, he stopped in his tracks to say a prayer for the sister cathedral in France.
Matter of fact, Notre Dame is depicted in one of the stained glass windows of this cathedral.
Both are Gothic cathedrals, but there are differences. Washington National Cathedral is 111 years old, what Hollerith calls a toddler next to 850-year-old Notre Dame. And Facilities Director Jim Shepard said the Washington Cathedral is made mostly of steel, stone, and concrete. With catwalks as the biggest wooden element, there's little room for fire hazards.
And probably the only similarity there is that our outside roof is lined with lead, similar to Notre Dame.
Despite that, officials here had already started a 3-part fire and safety plan when the tragedy in Paris occurred, a review process that Shepard says will continue.
Anytime you have a sister cathedral like this that has a problem that is as catastrophic as they had, you always look at it and try and figure out what you can learn from it and how you can improve your structure.
Some safety measures, like emergency lighting, sprinklers, and smoke detectors, were already in place, but Shepard expects more, if only because safety codes have changed drastically since the groundbreaking here in 1907. Most of the damage at Notre Dame came because of its oak wood roof and spire. Shepard said the spire itself weighed 700 tons, puncturing the vaulted ceilings, but he said fire brings other problems.
The fire caused a lot of damage, but so will the smoke and so will the water that was put in there to mitigate the fire.
And fire is not the only threat. The Washington National Cathedral was rocked 8 years ago by an earthquake that caused $34 million worth of damages. The cathedral has raised and spent $15 million on earthquake repairs in a process that is expected to take years. $1 billion have already been pledged to rebuilding Notre Dame. While the Washington National Cathedral is still trying to repair from earthquake damages back in 2011, they said they are overjoyed to see the amount of support going to Notre Dame during this time. At the National Cathedral, I'm Alyssa Klink, Cronkite News.
2 months after it let the Violence Against Women Act lapse, the House today overwhelmingly voted to renew the law. The act funds domestic violence shelters, extends protections to Native American women and to partners in LGBTQ relationships, and more. But getting the bill passed was a fight, as Lev Junius reports live from our Washington bureau.
The final vote of 263 to 158 was a partisan one. Only one Democrat had voted no. But while everyone agrees on the goal of the bill, Republicans accuse House Democrats of dressing the bill up like a Christmas tree, with liberal amendments that are sure to doom the measure in the Senate.
For Democrats like Phoenix Congressman Greg Stanton, today's vote was a victory and, more importantly, badly needed to protect victims.
Heartened, today was an important vote. As you know, in Arizona, sadly, we're one of the top 10 states in the country for death by domestic violence.
That tragedy is even worse in Native American communities. A National Institute of Justice research report said 84% of Indigenous women experience violence, 56% is sexual, and it is said 90% of assaults are committed by non-tribal members. Juana Majo Dixon, Secretary of National Congress of American Indians, said it's nearly impossible for tribes to prosecute non-tribal members, but VAWA would change that.
The laws that we had, unless the tribe had an agreement with the person who was non-native that married into your society to be governed by the laws, there were no laws that protected us. And our tribal police, our tribal, anyone who had any authority to address that on the tribal lands could only go so far, because they would rely on their constitutional rights to protect them, and the laws couldn't break through that.
Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, a survivor of domestic abuse herself, said prosecutions like that are important, but she said that Democrats added too many elements that are not needed to protect women and children.
We all want to protect women and children, and VAWA has typically received wide-ranging bipartisan support. However, this legislation fails to do that. We should be focusing on common sense, bipartisan reforms to VAWA instead of on a bill that is a non-starter in the U.S. Senate and a bill that will not be signed by the President.
Lesko pointed to provisions that she said would violate the Second Amendment of confiscating guns or require transgender victims to be housed in shelters with vulnerable women. Stanton says he does not understand the opposition. What's important, he says, is the bottom line support for women who have been victims.
There are so many victims, particularly in Arizona. I don't know why they voted against it. Whatever reason it may have been, you're overthinking it. Supporting victims is the right thing to do.
33 House Republicans crossed the aisle to vote for the bill today, despite the margin of victory in the Democrat-controlled House. However, the bill still has to go to the Republican-controlled Senate, where its future is less certain. In Washington, Lev Junius, Cronkite News.
It may be the most popular government program you've never even heard of. Opportunity zones were created in 2017 to spur private investment in low-income areas. Thousands of zones span cities, rural and tribal areas, and Arizona officials joined others at the White House this week celebrating them, as Alyssa Klink reports from our Washington bureau.
Officials from around the country came to the White House for a conference on the importance of economic opportunity zones, but Coconino County Supervisor Jim Park didn't need any convincing.
It can be a large corporation that comes in, and they can save a lot of money on capital gains taxes and pour that money back into the community and into the business.
The Coconino County Supervisor is talking about opportunity zones, high poverty areas designated by local governments for investment by businesses or individuals looking for a tax break.
They'll save that money, and that is the attraction that gets them to come to our depressed area to build their business.
These zones were created as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. Since then, more than 8,700 have been created around the country, including about 170 in Arizona. At a White House event, President Donald Trump said they are already working.
Our goal is to rebuild homes, schools, businesses, and communities that need it the most.
The zones let investors shelter capital gains, with the tax break growing the longer they keep their funds in the project. The money is put in an opportunity fund that invests in local developments.
If we can create opportunity for economic development, that's what we need to do.
Santa Cruz County Board Vice Chairman Bruce Bracker said his county chose to introduce these zones to the downtown area, but that doesn't mean rural areas are being overlooked.
I think it's a really diverse problem.
Benga Adjalori at the Center for American Progress said local governments often choose places that have the tools to grow. But while that lets taxpayers invest financially in a community, it does not make them invest emotionally.
You can actually invest in an area without engaging with the community. Doesn't speak well about the program.
Whatever its shortcomings, Bracker and Park say the incentives are a good move by the government to benefit businesses and communities in need. If anything, Park says it should be expanded.
Some of the most depressed areas are not in the opportunity zones. So I think what we're going to have to do is go back to Congress and figure that out with expanding the opportunity zones.
Even though the program is only 17 months old, they're both seeing improvements from the economic opportunity zones in their communities. Reporting from the White House, I'm Melissa Klink, Cronkite News.
Innovation in government may bring big high-tech advances to mind, but not every innovation comes from tech centers on the coast, and not every advance is flashy. That was the message at a New America event in Washington, where Love Junius tells us how Phoenix played a role.
Phoenix Public Works Director Ginger Spencer was invited to Washington to talk about innovation. And for Spencer, that means talking trash.
So one of the creative solutions that we have is working with a company called Palm Silage, where they are taking our palm fronds, which are basically the leaves, and basically converting it into livestock feed.
The seemingly simple solution has helped the city keep tons of trash out of the landfill and got Spencer an invitation to a New America Foundation panel on innovation in government. The Government Fix brought together city officials and foundation executives to share their experiences and how to innovate in government. Cecilia Munoz, Vice President of Public Interest Technology at New America, says innovation is vital, but it's just as important for innovation to reach the people affected by it.
What we need now is the intent, and to make sure that the people who are making policy are both equipped with the skill sets and the intention to engage the folks who are the point of this whole exercise in designing the policy.
One way Phoenix puts its innovation into action is by partnering with Arizona State University's Resource Innovation and Solutions Network, which recycles trash to create products like compost. Spencer says that keeps grass clippings and tree trimmings out of the landfill.
What we wanted to do was take some of the compost from our city-owned facility and apply that in our Parks Department. And so by partnering with Arizona State University through the RISM program, we were able to evaluate our work. It was very successful, and then also make that business case to the city and to our Parks Department to consider applying it to more city parks.
Finding new ways to introduce change is not an option, says Spencer.
Every city, in order to survive, in order to be resilient, every city has to be innovative, right? You cannot afford not to innovate.
In Washington, Love Junius, Cronkite News.
Not only do the innovations have to reach the community, Spencer says they can come from the community too. She said the idea for palm frond recycling started with a call for ideas from the public, and the city developed it from there.
It's been years in the making, a multi-state plan to preserve the Colorado River as the source of drinking water for tens of millions of people in the West.
And that plan moved one step closer to approval today with an upbeat hearing before a House committee in Washington. Cronkite News reporter Alyssa Klink was at the hearing today and has the story live from our Washington bureau. Alyssa?
There have been lots of fights along the way as Arizona worked with 6 other states, local and tribal officials, and the U.S. and Mexican governments. But with the deal almost in hand, today was a day for joking, not fighting.
Arizonans, as we say, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. But apparently today, water's for compromising, and that's a good thing.
That was the general mood today at a House Natural Resources Subcommittee hearing where state and federal officials presented the long-awaited Colorado Drought Contingency Plan. Among other things, the plan revises the amount of water that each of the basin states will be able to draw from Lake Mead and Lake Powell should there be a shortage. Everybody had to give a little something.
What I think is important is to recognize that the agreements and the legislation is a compromise. Everybody is going to feel some pain.
If it works, that compromise will not just limit water removal, it will help prevent future shortfalls. One speaker said the plan would cut in half the risk of the Colorado River from reaching critically low levels. But first, a bill has to be approved and sent to the president. Arizona Department of Water Resources Director Tom Bushatsky is confident Arizona Congressman Raul Grijalva can get it done.
He will be introducing the legislation, and that process will begin there. The process will begin in the Senate to introduce legislation and move that forward and get the votes on both sides and make this law so that we can implement the DCP.
Once the deal is approved, it will run through 2026 when the Colorado River Basin states will have to start over. But Bushatsky said those talks will begin almost immediately.
We now have a safe haven. We have a bridge to get to the next phase. And I think that next phase will be kicked off through the renegotiation of the 2007 guidelines, which was required to begin before the end of 2020, but we will begin long before then to work on this.
Today's hearing drew 7 of the state's 9 House members and a number of tribal leaders from around Arizona. While Grijalva is expected to introduce legislation in the House, Arizona Senator Martha McSally vowed yesterday to introduce a Senate bill. In Washington, Alyssa Klink, Cronkite News.
That's it for this special edition of Cronkite News tonight. Thank you for joining us. For top stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.